Well, we're just about getting ready, starting in a minute, just to see if we get the last guys in. Thank you very much for joining. Well, welcome again. Thanks for joining once again. This is about 1 hour with the key new features for Dynamics 365 Finance, or the key new features in the release wave 1 for 2022. I'm Finn from AXcademy out of Copenhagen. Welcome in. Now, what's on the menu for today? We have the key new features, and what would that be? Well, before we actually get started, I just want you to, well, I'd like you to hang around. And if you enjoyed today's session, but you want some more details, I could recommend you to get onto our live online training for EMB 300, where we'll cover the core from the 4th of May. And on the 27th, with yours truly, it'll be finance, including some, not all, some of the new topics we'll have a look at today. If you'd like to find out more, pop some messages to Alison in the chat, where she will also have some links. And if you prefer some self-study on demand, make sure you stay until the end, because we have some very special offers coming up. Well, on to the actual topics. What we're going to have today, based on the Microsoft announced release wave 1 for 2022, covers all the new functionality planned to be delivered to the market from April to September. Well, actually, some of the things have been out in preview or whatever, but let's just have a look at that. In this webinar, you will find, well, hot air, because that's part and parcel of any release wave, I guess, but we'll also get to the real meat, what is planned and what is kind of being expected in here. Now, be aware that these release waves, they might change. When I did last preparations yesterday, I noticed that there were a few changes in the release wave. I've been having a look around since it was published about a month ago, I think. And then the latest changes yesterday caught me a little bit by surprise with some of the things. So do keep in mind that the release waves, they are subject to change, because some of the things are planned and some of the things can be dismissed until later on. Go on to release wave 2, as we've seen some of things happened already. There might also be new topics included, and of course there could be some date changes in there. But what is actually that we have, what it looks like right now. Let's get done with the hot air. I'll try not to let out too much hot air during this webinar, but Microsoft had a bit of hot air, and I think to reflect the needs of delighting our existing customers. Well, no matter what, the delighting, that's always fine, but the existing customers. And that is, as I think I've said through many webinars by now, that the thing is the existing customers. Earlier, at least to my experience, there was a lot of hot air from Microsoft towards potential customers. So when we're trying to close some sales during the pre-sales, we had a lot of promises, which might eventually prove then to become a fact. But now Microsoft, over the last years, I would say, is more, well, actually fulfilling the needs of the existing customers. And I think that is true for this release wave as well. So hot air or not, I really think that it's going to reflect some of the needs of the existing customers. You know, there's always room for more, but I think some of the changes that has happened already, not public though, has happened already, and some of the things which are included in release wave, they're really nice. Low-hanging fruits might be things which are plain and simple, might be, but if you use a plain and simple thing 1,000 times per month or whatever, it's a time saver. So let's just see what it actually is. From Microsoft's point of view, when you have a look in the release wave, you can then see that it's this time focusing on two things, core financials and on the globalization. Globalization, well, might be challenged these times, but it is a big thing with Dynamics 365 too. And some of these things in here are looking promising, but they're not here yet. So some of the things that I can actually talk about is especially the things about core financials, where the things about globalization, we've seen a lot of these things already, but some of the new things coming around is a little bit hard to talk about. Some of the things are not even public yet. Some things are perhaps not even finalized internally with Microsoft. But these are the two sections that you will find if you have a look at the release wave for 22, the release wave 1 for 22 for finance. Now, Microsoft will give you an overview in one way, and I have decided to group them in a slightly different way, all because I think, of course, that it makes a little bit more sense in order to understand it. Maybe also see how some of the topics are interrelated, and that is not necessarily the way that it's displayed on the detailed release wave on Microsoft's docs. So what is it? First, in the words of Microsoft, and then afterwards, I have regrouped this into some of the things which I think will make more sense. And as always, and mentioned in the chat, please drop a note. If you got questions already now, drop them over there, and I'll have a look at it when we get to the question and answer session at the end, if I know the answer, that is. So, additional enhancements in here, including some more things about automation about the vendor invoices, which can be so time-consuming, automations about the year-end close, which Microsoft actually already delivered quite a lot about in the last year, which was promised with, I think, release wave 1 in 21 and release wave 2 in 21 as well. And now these things have been delivered, and there's a couple of extra things this time around as well. It's much more about analytical data using the data lake. And the data lake is not something that I'm going to talk much about, but this is a place where Microsoft and some of the ISVs and some of my colleagues are pushing quite hard that not enough people are taking advantage of these possibilities with the data lake in here. And then the subscription billing. And if there's one thing I've been chased by from one of my webinars, this was once last year, I mentioned that subscription billing capabilities are coming. I did a blog post on our website too, which has been heavily read. And I got a lot of questions. And where do you read about that? How do you know? And so on. And, you know, you can't always tell how you know about things, but it's good to see now it's published that we do have subscription billing in here, and we'll have a look at that. I'm very much looking forward to that part. So in other words, full subscription billing in here, and some of these things will remind some of you about revenue recognition, you know, the topic that was added to sales sort of the capabilities in there, and very much so been asked about that for years, Microsoft that is, and now finally last year, the year before, last year it was really going into effect, and that was on sales orders only. And now we have real subscription billing, whether it's been services or whatever it is, more about the subscription industry, the way to make revenue. Now we have that solution. Of course, that includes some of the same things that we have with the revenue recognition, which is on sales orders. Now, mentioned already about the analytics in here, and some of the big addings coming, haven't seen it yet, is the OCR capabilities now being part of standard Dynamics 365. You know, there's a lot of good options out there from ISVs, and I'm looking forward to see how this sort of matches the things which are out there in the open market. Always good to see that this is included in this standard offering, I would say. Now, the electronic reporting just keeps on growing, and electronic reporting I'm going to mention quite a lot. We are working on a course for electronic reporting. It's a big thing, really, and there's just many more things coming. So when are we going to have it finished? I don't know. If it's going to be 3 months or half a year, I don't know. but it's coming for technical consultants, for application consultants as well. And the reason why I mention that right now is that, as some of you would know, the configurable business documents is a part of electronic reporting. It builds on electronic reporting, and now there's been some more added to the latest release of public release of Dynamics 365, the 10.025, which you can actually roll out from, I think it was yesterday. You could roll it out from Lifecycle Services. And this will, you'll find some new things about the configurable business documents. Now, subscription billing and all the other things have been there. And I'd rather like to get to how I group these and why. Some of the things I'm just going to mention, and of course you can read more about it on docs in the release wave 1 for 2022. And some of the ones I'm just going to muse a little bit about what does it actually mean. The vendor invoice, OCR, there's I think 3 or 4 of the various topics described in the various features, new features described in the release wave, which are about vendor invoice, OCR. Same thing for subscription billing. And then there are all the other ones in there, which I tried to do some of these ones in detail, and some of these ones I will just mention briefly. Like now I could do batch on bills of exchange and other things. That's all fine, but that's just a minor thing. So those kind of things I won't spend much time on. About the vendor invoice, optical character recognition or scanning solutions, if you prefer. A lot of good solutions out there in the market for sure, and obviously a big market as well. Some of these add-on solutions, especially the ones which are done as kind of modules to Dynamics 365, being very successful. And I guess that's one of the reasons why Microsoft would like to offer at least some of this in a standard Dynamics 365 Finance. So as part of this, now we're going to add this in here. So you can do full automation of accounts payable. Well, you could do some of this already using the ISVs. But some of the things that has been added or will be added in here would enable you to use some of the tools that we know from other parts of the Microsoft stack, like Azure Form Recognizer or AI Builder, of course, the Power Platform in itself. So an out-of-the-box vendor invoice model, well, yeah, for learning how things that will behave. So ideally, you could then, in standard Dynamics 365 Finance, have all you would need to be able to scan the vendor invoices. Well, if you get printed invoices, of course, you still need the scanner, but if you get them electronically, I guess you'll then be able to get those ones in here, using this tool. What are the actual features that is mentioned in connection with that in the release wave 1 for 2022? Well, there are these options in here, configurations for the OCR service itself, and how we're going to use that, deployment wizard. And I'm a big fan of the wizard, you know, with the number sequence wizard and so many other things that takes care of setting up the things if you just answer a few questions. And I guess that's going to be part of this as well. Then a hub for, I guess, connecting all the various things, the various tools, scanners, electronic PDFs, or whatever it's going to be in here. And then set up some business rules in the staging area. The staging area, a test area, preliminary area, or whatever it's going to be. So you can test the things over here before you actually apply the business rules. Staging is important, whether it's on a website, whether it's Dynamics 365. So you can test the things if they work as expected before you actually put them to live. But some of the things you can do in some of the areas of Dynamics 365 in finance and in supply chain management, in other areas too, but not in too many places, unfortunately. It's always nice, so you don't have to necessarily set up a complete sandbox or test area just to test a few things, but you could do that in a staging area. Looking forward to see how that is actually going to be done. A new invoice data entity for the OCR recognition. I haven't seen that one actually yet, but looks interesting, of course. Now for the subscription billing, what is going to be part of that? Well, if you got subscription being for a web service or being for on-demand training or whatever it could be, of course, it would be nice if you could set it up to be automated. And in Dynamics 365 Finance before, it was not really that easy. I know you've got billing codes and other things too, but make it fully automated, you couldn't, and at least not the way we'd like to do it with the revenue recognition and some of the other things that we could do on sales orders. And now it's coming to us. It's not just about the splitting the revenue onto some various accounts to do the time shifting and so on. It's also doing some fancy things about contracting, reuse of things, so you don't have to start from scratch every time you have like a new IT project or whatever it's going to be. You can reuse some of the things you had before. The promise is, at least. So you could have consumption, milestone billing, and other things too for this in here. You could have larger contracts, and this is about the large volume things. It could be mobile phones or whatever it could be. And that I'm looking forward to, being working quite a lot with mobile phone operators. That was huge number of transactions going on, contracts and other things too. So looking forward to see how that is being handled in the final solution, that is. And then the complexity about the recurring revenue, how that's going to be handled. There's so many different rules also with IFRS and some of the other accounting standards. We need to take into account about the delivery, about the cost of goods and other things too. And that is where on the sales order side, things are being taken care of by and large. And hopefully the same thing over here with our recurring subscription billing on that. Recurrence is the thing. Now, what are the actual tools that's going to be part of that recurring contract billing? You set up a contract and you can then run the things automatically or manually with proposals and other things like we saw on the sales order. The revenue allocation, like we saw on the sales order, how to do the splitting. I haven't seen that, how that is going to be set up. Maybe some of you have seen that we could set up on the item group and then override directly on the items for the sales orders. The things about the timing and all the other things as well. And now if we got subscriptions without item consumptions on, there would be other things to consider, I would think, at least. And then the deferrals, the time shifting of that when you do the subscription and maybe you got some expenses being service expenses or whatever it's going to be, it's going to happen, of course, in the revenue period of the subscription. The whole idea being the same as we had with the revenue recognition on the sales orders. So I think if you haven't had a look at the revenue recognition on the sales orders, this could be a good time to actually have that. There will be so much in common in the understanding of how things they work, in the understanding of the configuration. Of course, it's going to be different, but similar things. And the whole concept about that is going to be very similar. So this could be a good time to have a look at supply chain management, guys, kind of with the revenue recognition. I think there's a lot of financial things in the revenue recognition up here, even though it involves things like item groups and release products and so on. Now, these were the two big topics in the core financials. And now I would like to get through the details. It's not that I'm just going to show you 12 bullets as it is with the other details that are mentioned in there. I got 3 or 4 I'd like to highlight because, of course, those are the ones I think are the most interesting ones. And then I'm going to mention the rest of them. And having been through that, I will then have mentioned all the new features or change features in core financials in release wave 1 for 2022 in Dynamics 365 Finance. Now, the text from Microsoft, and then getting through some of the topics that I have decided to show you. Enhancements around the ledger settlements, including if you do corrections on the bank account and so on. That the ledger settlement could happen automatically. And we've got a new tool helping that, the financial tags. And then you could think about, oh, tax and tags, and so on. We'll go back to that, what an actual means. So these three plus the next one in here, general ledger, year-end enhancements, which is just a couple of new things on top of the things that were added last year with the last two release waves in 2021. These four will be the ones that I will detail just a little bit more. And then I got some smaller things, maybe not small to you, but to me, got it. You could do a badge job, fine. I know what that would be. And then invoice numbers could be longer or whatever, these smaller things that I've got in here. So these are my groupings. This is not Microsoft, but these 12 features are outside the ones that I mentioned to you already, which were about the things in the things about the revenue recognition thing and the other things we've been through already. So let's just have a look. In this, I'll show you some of the text from Microsoft and discuss a little bit with myself, at least, what is it actually? And I'm not going to do all this read aloud in here. But about the ledger settlements, I think that the interesting things in here is that you'll be able to, and then we get to what it actually means to you. You'll be able to do, when you do the year-end close settlement in here, you'll be able to get the unsettled transactions in here. So you'll have a look at those, and then you can have a look at keep those ones, or you want to settle those ones right now. That makes it easier to settle transactions next year. There are other things about the settlement in here that you could do now. Settlement can happen only within one fiscal year. You can only do that to transaction happen to the same account. And then we've got some reports that will help us sort out what is going on or what hasn't been going on. So we don't have to run the queries on the screen, which could be a little bit tricky to set up. Of course, the Save View, one of my favorite horses, is here to help us with, once you build the filter and save the screen, you got it. But now we got this on reports in here as well, so you can see settled and unsettled things in here as well. And then when you get down to open these screens further down on the trials list balance page, then you can see the unsettled transactions only. So by and large, when you get to the year-end process in here with that, there are tools that say, hey, you haven't taken into account this or those. We've got these unsettled ones. Would you like to do that? A little bit similar to when we do the inventory closing procedure, you know, with the when not financial updated receipts and so on. We can then find the things which we should really focus on. One of the interesting things in here about this with the settlement is that now we can have ledger settlements automated. That means you can run in the background, so you don't have to mark this manually, dump it into an Excel spreadsheet, or whatever kind of things you would like to do. So you can focus on other things. Is this big or not? I'm not sure, but it's potentially a huge time saver if you care about this. And I think a lot of people, they do. So the settlement automation in there would then look into what had been happening in there, so you could do fewer things manually. You need to set up some rules, and this is where we got, this is feature number 2, the ledger settlement automation, and it sort of indicates what's going to be the next feature I'm going to show you. Because among the rules, you would then set up that you could match using financial tags. Financial tag is a new feature, so I better explain that just a little bit. It's actually, to use American terminology, awesome kind of thing in here. It doesn't look big, but I think this is going to be very popular. And why is that? Well, financial tag, a new feature, is a possibility of being able to track user-defined fields on the accounting entries. Sometimes we've been using financial dimensions for that, and the user has been using financial dimensions for that. I'm not a big fan of that, but once in a while you just had to do it. Finn, I need to carry this information with me, and it changes from time to time where I put it. Sometimes it would be financial dimensions for all sorts of reasons, but that's not necessarily a good idea, because financial dimensions could be a field where you want to reuse things. And if you then got some kind of information about, I don't know, a reference to a vendor, whatever it would be, you would use a financial dimension, and you would have a financial dimension value that you'll use just once. That's not good use of financial dimension. The more financial dimensions you create, the more trouble, well, the more time at least you will consume when you do this or that. So if Microsoft would let us put the information somewhere else than in a financial dimension, it would help a lot, I think. So there are two things in here, I think, at least. It's not a very big thing. It doesn't look like it, but I think this is going to be high value. One thing is that it can reduce the number of financial dimensions that we use. I'm all fan of that. You know, when you get those 20 or 18 or more financial dimensions, we're asking for trouble, time-wise or otherwise. So if we could reduce the number of financial dimensions, that's one thing. And then if we could use these financial tags, the additional fields, so to speak, the additional information on a transaction, to automate the ledger settlement, that's not too bad, I think. Let me just go backwards on the presentation here and see, what was it then? The ledger settlement automation can, based on rules, include financial tags. Of course, amounts and other things too. That's normal. But the financial tags then is then, if one thing, reducing the financial dimensions, another thing to use this for matching. So imagine that you would do some payment references, which is kind of a one-off information quite often. You would like to include that in a transaction. So later on, we then reconcile the bank accounts, the bank statements, or when you do the automatic settlement of the ledger transactions, you got this information in a tag. That's not so bad, I think. So for this just very casually mentioned feature, I think there could be a lot of value. Up to 15 tags. I'm not sure why it's 15, but you know, sometimes how many custom fields can you add? And so, well, it's 15 tags up here, right? It'll be stored on accounting entries in general ledger. That's, to me, right now, fine. And then we can start nagging about, oh, why not 20? Why not 50? Why not unlimited? I don't know. I'm pleased it's here, right? I think there's a lot of good value to this. Well, that was a little bit too quickly, right? Two things, caution. Values are not validated or entered by default. That's sort of, I think, in the purpose of these ones here. They're not financial dimensions, right? There's something that just key in a payment reference or whatever you'd like to in here. Okay, so no validation and no possibility of populating the fields automatically. And I think that's the whole idea of the financial tags. Well, for now, at least. I was tempted for today, but I didn't do it. I was tempted for today to ask you guys in a poll, what do you think about all the new microservices and so on being added? There is actually was a good discussion going on LinkedIn about the pros and cons of the new services or add-ons and other things too, which you can use, but you can't modify or whatever. If there is, of course not, but if there should be an error in those, you'll have to wait until Microsoft fixes those. But I'm not going to discuss that today. But I still think it's interesting to consider the high frequent addition of new things being kind of external to Dynamics 365. I know Microsoft is struggling to get sort of on the same platform and so on, but there is quite a lot of things which are now happening outside our normal environment in Dynamics 365. I'm not always a big fan of that. Anyway, additional features, I'm a big fan of that. And now using this, or once it's being released, being able to use this microservice for improving on the year-end process in here. So there's a lot of things that can help the performance, and there are some of the things added in here with the general ledger year-end enhancements that you can use the microservice. That's one thing, speeding up the process. And then you can specify balance sheet dimensions like we could do with the profit and loss statement, with the profit and loss transactions. Sorry about that. So being able to specify the financial dimension values for the balance sheet, just like we do it for profit and loss, whether I'm going to use that or not, I'm not sure. I haven't thought too much about that yet. I can't remember. I've been in a situation where I wanted to, but maybe you guys did that. And then, of course, by using the add-ons or the microservices or whatever, a lot of times this improves the performance, and B, perhaps also adds additional things. As far as I read it for this particular part, it's about improving the performance of this. And now at this place in the release where Microsoft just wanted to let you know that if you missed it last year, there were some enhancements as well, that you could set up some closing templates, was taken out of the actual run the thing kind of page and now moved into a new setup page. And I'm all fan of that. Shouldn't have setup configuration on the same as periodic scheduling or closing or whatever. You could reverse now, or since July, you could reverse a closing in here. You can no longer leave the voucher number blank, even if we before could sort of force the users to do now by setting up a general ledger parameter. Now that parameter isn't available anymore, so now you're forced to use voucher numbers when closing, and I think that all makes sense, really. Okay. Now the smaller things, right? These were the 4 topics that I have decided to get into in detail of the other things, and now the really small things in here, just worth mentioning, I think. Update the budget plans with Excel template up. Like you could do that before, right? But now it's batch enabled. The budget plans could be huge. So using OData could sort of, well, take a long time. And now it's possible to use a batch update for that. There is a new button added. When I saw that, I thought, hey, a new button. Well, actually, it's nice. So now instead of having to filter to see all the various transactions in a settlement voucher, now you can use the button. I know the screen is not so clear, but you can see it up there in the upper right-hand corner. You can see the settlement voucher, and then if you click on that button, being in the vendor and the customer settlement, you would then see the transaction being settled in here. That's nice. It's not huge, just nice daily use. So Microsoft, as they said in the hot air, they do take care of their existing customers. But this and a lot of the other things that happened this time around. Is this rocket science? No, it's not. Just common sense. And I think a lot of the things in release wave 1 for 22, just common sense. I know a lot of things about the globalization and so on coming to that, but a lot of things we're seeing right now, tax and so on, common sense and useful. Bill of exchange, batch enabled for, I think those 5 different journals that we have. They cannot be batched. Not a huge thing to me. I don't use that too often, but in some countries, of course, they do. Reverse the reconcile advanced bank reconciliation. That's nice to be able to do. And then to do the bank to ledger reconciliation in here as well. Now, I just want to mention from the text, I haven't been able to get some screenshots from it yet, but in the good old days, which is kind of still now, if you did any corrections to a bank transaction, you could do reconciliation automatically on that. Now it's possible. A correction record will be added, and that means that the reconciliation could now happen automatically, even if you did a correction to the bank transaction. During the daily life, one of the things that happens is that, you have to, once in a while, you have to pay the vendors. I know, but you have to. So you create the payment journal, you do the payment proposal, you do an on-account payment or whatever, and you do an electronic transfer. When you do the electronic transfer, you obviously need the vendor's bank account. Otherwise, where do you send the money? What could happen then in the period between you actually starting to do the things in here and then you submit the journal to the workflow? If you do that kind of things, then somebody might just have changed the vendor's bank account to be on the Cayman Islands or whatever happened on that. So the vendor bank account that you have selected while creating the transactions in the journal no longer valid, or there is no active bank account on the vendor. That's not nice. If you ever tried that, you know, this creates a bit of work. Now, before you submit the journal to the workflow, now the bank accounts being validated, and you can see the result up here on one of these transactions in the journal that there is no bank account active on the vendor in here for that line in here, whatever. Small thing, right? But useful. It is really time consuming if you start going through this, would send it to the workflow and so on, and there is no active bank account for that. And then you have to redo things. Now it's much better. Be early, get the error in the journal, and you can fix it before, hopefully fix it before you submit the journal for approval. Nice work, I think. In the foreign currency revaluation, there are performance improvements in accounts receivable, accounts payable. I thought a little bit about why is it only in accounts receivable, accounts payable? I guess it's because the ones in bank, cash and bank management module, and in general ledger, they're so new that they probably are as good as they could be. I'm just guessing here. I don't know. The ones in accounts receivable, accounts payable, they're kind of old. You know, when you compare the accounts payable, accounts receivable, foreign currency revaluation with the general ledger, there's somewhat left to be desired over. You cannot preview what's going to happen, then just post whatever it was. But anyway, in accounts receivable, accounts payable, now it's going to be split into smaller batches, and then it should run faster or much faster, which is always nice. Increase the length of invoice numbers. Fine. I think it's vendor invoice numbers actually on that. And that is not the biggest thing to me. Well, not vendors invoices, of course, but the invoice numbers or whatever. It's okay, fine, got that. The globalization. Now, I did mention hot air earlier, and this is going to be a bit of hot air because this is going to be eventually over time later on this year. So I don't have many facts in here. This is going to be quite a lot of things about the quoting in here. Quoting Microsoft, that is. So the overview of that. From the horse's own mouth, Microsoft will continue to improve on this and build some more with the globalization. There's going to be a new functionality, a new feature, Globalization Studio. It's not out yet. Haven't seen it. So I don't know much about what it is apart from what I read. When I see low code, I think, maybe you think too, something like Power Platform or whatever. That's what Microsoft is buzzing about. A lot of things in here. So maybe bolt on Power Platform, whatever it's going to be in here. So you can now use this Globalization Studio. I don't know if they're trying to indicate something like Visual Studio or whatever it's going to be, but Globalization Studio is the thing going through just about all the things I'm going to show you now about the globalization. It's mentioned all the time. And the things are going to be mentioned with the tax audit and reporting services and so on, built on Globalization Studio. So I guess this is going to be big. So there's going to be things in here with tax calculations, electronic invoicing, and what has electronic invoicing got to do with the globalization? Why is this not under core finance? I think it's because the idea is that electronic invoicing is so different from country to country. We use one in my country in Denmark, use other in Norway, and in different countries that I work with. So I guess that's why the electronic invoicing, being country specific, is over here with the Globalization Studio. I'm all a fan of the globalization thing, globalization in general, outside in the real world, and also globalization inside Dynamics 365. You know, in the old days, you had to wait for ages before we actually got something for smaller countries like my own one or some other smaller countries as well. But now with electronic reporting, and I guess with the Globalization Studio as well, we could now build it, but it can be built sort of on the fly. I like that. A public preview. So that means, I guess, this is not going to be fully operational before we see the next release wave. So it's probably going to be here again when we meet in 6 months or 5 months or whatever it's going to be. So as part of Globalization Studio here was, once again, we will have a service, tax, audit, and reporting service, but it'll be a preview, not the final thing. What's it going to do? Well, you can read for yourself. Once again, a microservice, electronic reporting into. So electronic reporting into a low-code microservice. I'm looking forward to see what that actually means. We've got to take the whole thing about electronic reporting, put it kind of on its own, or it's just going to be the actual operational part of electronic reporting in there. I don't know. And then more things in the configurable business documents. And I'm a big fan of configurable business documents. There's so many things that you could do yourself. And it's mentioned in the same sentence as some of you would know, the configurable business documents. They're built on electronic reporting. You have to use electronic reporting to get to the configurable business documents. And that's where you'll now be able to have a lot more standard offerings, templates, and so on from Microsoft. A few more details in here about this. I just need to keep an eye on the clock as well. So I think I mentioned some of this and just being grouped in a slightly different way in here. The Globalization Studio, and you can see this is kind of the container for the things mentioned in here with the tax calculations, electronic invoicing, with the configurable business documents, which could then be used for setting up electronic invoicing then for the various requirements. So I've grouped this into basically two, tax and reporting and electronic reporting. But once again, they are interconnected, right? So this is just me doing a group or two. Tax and reporting and the tax calculation in here using an API. So this could be moving much faster if you got high volume of invoices. Again, could be mobile phone operators who do millions of invoices each and every month and could have them across different countries. But alas, there's going to be, initially at least, a connector with the US tax rate providers. Well, I'm sure we could build it easily for some of the other ones in here as well. Other connectors in here, so we could have last mile business to government integration. I guess this is sort of the final things which could not be done by the standard solution. Then we could extend the global coverage in here by sending e-invoices in here where Microsoft has not done the things. Then you use a provider outside. We got the connector in here, do the last things for us, and then we could do the primary things inside Dynamics 365 Finance. Preview. Once again, when it says preview in a release wave, things can change. Things are likely to change. It's going to take some time before it's here, but it's big. I guess it's a big undertaking that Microsoft has here. So no wonder that they put it into preview. It's going to be some time, guys, before it's finished, I'm sure. But looking forward to that. In the group of electronic reporting, I kind of got some of the same things in here as well. Configurable business documents, phase 2, that you can specify the destinations in print management. You know, print management's been with us for ages, And now we've got some additional things in there that we could set up. Just to go a couple of things in here. Order by the function in the queries, and in the business document management workspace, which was changed last year, I think for the much better. Now it's integrated with the global repository on that. And that means then, depending on the role that you have in Dynamics 365, then you'll be able to grab the templates. So it doesn't sort of automatically add all sorts of templates. It adds the templates that suits your role. So maybe you have to ask a colleague if it exists in some of the areas where you don't work, if you care about that. Okay. If you're working with the barcodes, QR codes and other things too, maybe you know about the Zebra program language. Quite often this is being used for printing out barcode labels and so on. And a lot of customers, a lot of service providers, they use that. So now it's part of electronic reporting, going to be part of electronic reporting. Sorry. Now, thank you very much for hanging around this far. Just got an offer for you guys before we get to the question answer session. For the first 25 that are going to sign up for our, well, any of our on-demand courses, we offer you 25% and a free virtual machine, sandbox, training environment, whatever you like to call that one. And well, not very good at calculating off the top of my head, but I guess this is something like 150 euros value or whatever it is. The VM is 99 and 25% of our, well, you can sort out yourself. Just make sure when you're on our website, you want to check out, use the coupon code in here, web76. 76. This is day 76 today. So hopefully some of you will take advantage of this offer in here. And yes, as we go and we see the new things being added by Microsoft, it's going to be on our on-demand courses as well. No promises about the dates. We try to keep up with Microsoft. It's hard work, right? So you can find our on-demand courses if you have a look at the link that Alison just posted in the chat. And while you're having a look at that, let me just see in the chat session over here if there are any questions. And there is. Let me just see if I have anything I can answer in here. There's a question in here about is the vendor invoice going to impact the current Xflow process? I haven't got a clue. I didn't mention any names. I didn't mention any names of the solutions. Xflow, obviously, one of the widespread ones where I had the pleasure to train some of the guys in the good old days out of Hallenberg in Stockholm. Got a very good solution. Whether it's going to change any of that, I don't know. Since Xflow is a Dynamics 365 module plugin, whatever you like, so I'm sure they could easily adapt, if required, to the changes that Microsoft are going to do. So that's what I could say. I'm sure the guys themselves, Xflow, can answer much more about that. Let's see, that was one. And okay, I had a question in here, I guess, which was about the recurring subscription billing in there. How it's going to be different from project billing. That is a fairly big answer. It's going to be different. The subscription billing is actually a third-party module that existed for some time. That's some of the things I mentioned last year in a webinar and also in a blog post on our website. And then I had a lot of discussions with people if this is actually true or not. It is. And now it's kind of out in the public. How it would be different project billing. Yes, it would. It would be in the tools because obviously project billing is just about project billing. And I know there was some of the same terminology with the milestone billing, which we use in projects, and the item consumption revenue and so on. So just like with the revenue recognition and sales orders, with the project billing as well, there's a lot of similarities in the configuration and in the terminology, but it is different. There's actually a lot more to it. From what I've seen, I haven't seen the Microsoft implementation yet. I've seen the original basis for that, and it's different. Thank you for that question too. I have a question about, we got dimensions. What more can we get from financial tax? That's a very good question. I actually think what less could we have from financial tax? The financial tag, to me, is the possibility of reducing the number of financial dimensions, which I'm a big fan of. Well, I'm a big fan of financial dimensions, and I'm a big fan of having less than most of the projects where I'm working they would like to have. You know, when you think about financial dimensions, they can do so many things for you, and that's all good. No, it's not, because the more financial dimensions you add, sort of the more time things will take, and the more things potentially the users could invent just to meet the requirements of actually putting a value in there, sort of. So if you don't have the requirements for sort of reuse the values, if you don't use values which are being linked, you know, you can do the custom, or you could do the linked, the system-based value acquirements from the financial, like when you link to customer groups, you link to release products, or you link to some of the organization units like business units or departments. If you don't have that sort of requirement, why would you want to use a financial dimension? I'm going to start a long discussion about that, but why would you? If you just want to have a financial dimension for bringing across a value which is not being reused, like the payment reference thing, it's much better to use the tag in here. Financial dimensions should be kept to a minimum. I really think so, but maybe that's just me. So I think it will be able to give you less trouble, less headaches, less time consumption when you actually do things in here, less headaches also when you do the ledger settlement. Remember, I mentioned the financial tax in here for use during the settlements. Of course, you could say that I could use a financial dimension. I'm sure that's going to be part of the rules as well, but once again, it's going to be more time consuming, I think, at least. So I think using the financial tax instead of financial dimensions makes things less complicated and less time consuming. But if the financial dimension works and so on, fine. I just think it's an opportunity, once again, to discuss on our projects, to really need a financial dimension for this. And sometimes I really think the answer would be no. Thank you for that question. Very good one. And I'm looking forward to use this financial tax on the same thing in here and the same question in here. Will it create data discrepancy? I don't know what that means. Maybe you could ask again, so I know that the data discrepancy, well, obviously it is not validated against anything. So if you key in a payment reference, to use that again, which I think is a good example, if you key in a payment reference in here, and that is not the same one as you actually have or will have from the bank statement, obviously. But the other thing is, would you rather like to have a financial dimension for payment references where you'll need to have the values being added one by one by data import or keying in manually? That's a way to avoid the discrepancy. So by having to key in the values manually, which you will have by the financial tax in here, by having to key those in manually, of course, you create the possibility of an error. Just like when you have to select main accounts or other things manually, you create the possibilities of errors. Pro and cons, obviously. Okay, let's just see another question up here. When will Microsoft bring in regional country-specific payroll and statutory? Well, you better ask the guys themselves. I don't know. This is really sort of a Pandora's box of things in here with payroll and similar things in here. So I got no news whatsoever about that. And if they're going to do that, if they're going to do any of that, I really think it would take a lot of time just to maintain the things in here. I've been working a lot with payroll systems in the old days on that, and that was just in 3 or 4 countries. And it was a nightmare to maintain all the various things in there. Not just because you got the authorities, but you also got all the kind of things with the unions and other things in here. So all the various rules and regulations and so on will change. So I think from the payroll perspective, I think Microsoft is rather pulling the other way and doing less and less, if I understand the question correctly on that. Those were the questions I got, and I tried to answer those the best way in here. And thank you very much for your questions. I appreciate that we actually have live out there. And that was sort of it for today. Just wrapping up, very briefly remind you of a couple of live online courses coming up. May the 2nd with my excellent colleague Dennis, and then with Dennis's colleague Finn, or me, doing the finance course on the 27th of June. If you prefer live online courses in a classroom, that's possible too. More about that on our website. So thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for being in here today. And looking forward to see you back on one of our other webinars. And hopefully too, on our website, have a look at some of the things we've done in the blog, where you can find more things about some of the topics that I mentioned today, right now and later on as well. And if you just want to be informed and you haven't done so, please sign up for our newsletter. This was Finn out of Copenhagen from AXcademy. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for spending your time with me.